Hi everyone, welcome to the community classroom. This is Dr. Tracy McCarthy. We're going to be disentangling religion and psychology. This is a responsive discussion. There has been an entangling of religion and psychology based upon discussions that have been heard related to religion, history, and society. And so in that context, there is this conflation or mixing of psychology and religion, and this is with specific attention to paganism, paganistic belief and activity. One of the things to keep in mind when talking about issues that are outside of one's expertise is to examine the construct that we are talking about so that we don't create too much confusion there. And also it's important to indicate when we are not experts in something, when it's not our field of study. So you will often hear me say that I am not a biblical scholar, so I'm not a religious scholar. And so those things are important because sometimes we have some opinions about things and some perceptions about things, but they may not be accurate because we don't have all of the information. And so I'm going to try to create that distinction for you so that you have complete clarity regarding what is religion and what is psychology and how a number of things that have been attributed to psychology actually belong in the field of religion. And we're just going to start off by looking at some of these symbols. Usually when people see these symbols, they think about religion, religious practices, religious traditions, religious symbolism. Psychology is not something that people tend to think about when they see these symbols because these symbols are not related to psychology. There is a symbol that is related to psychology, and it's one of the letters of the Greek alphabet. But aside from that, these symbols that you see on the screen, whether they are related to monotheism or polytheism or some other form of theism, these symbols are related to religion and theology, not the study of psychology. If you recall, we had a previous conversation distinguishing psychology from medicine, and now we are going to distinguish psychology from theology or religion. And so we're going to look at some of the dynamics of theology so that you get a better understanding of how this fits in one camp and psychology fits in a totally different camp. And so when you are talking about belief in or worship of a superhuman power, you are talking about theology. You are talking about religion. When you are talking about deities, you are talking about theology. You are talking about religion. The same thing goes for anything related to faith, praise, worship, or doctrine. These are under the umbrella of religion. Now, in terms of psychology, you can study some of these dynamics with respect to psychology as we talk about what psychology is. But just in and of themselves, these constructs do not fit under the umbrella of the science or the art of psychology. This is definitely under the umbrella of theology and religion. When we wrap up, we are going to look at some other dynamics related to how this confusion might have come about. So we're going to look at some other dynamics related to theology and how those constructs may have become conflated with psychology. And as a matter of fact, this discussion is in response to that conflation. And so we're going to speak to those dynamics specifically. Now, psychology is rooted in epistemology, and epistemology is rooted in philosophy. And so that is where psychology comes from. It doesn't come from religion. And so epistemology is basically about the theory of knowledge, about knowing. It's about investigating things so that you go from opinion to a belief that is actually justified. And so that's what psychology is supposed to be about. So it's epistemological in terms of its origins. And then you see this discussion in Britannica related to epistemology, and it is the philosophical study of the nature, origin, and limits of human knowledge. And so the focus is on knowledge and reasoning. So you have that logos. And it has quite a history with respect to philosophy. And so you have things like metaphysics related to epistemology. You have logic and ethics, and those are specific branches of philosophy. So those are specific studies under that umbrella of philosophy. Another discipline that is closely related to philosophy actually is religion. You have another discipline that's related to it, which is law. However, each one of those disciplines are distinct in and of themselves, and so they are not philosophy. However, they may grow out of it. In response to the assertions that psychology is synonymous with paganism or religion, we are going to clarify what psychology is. And so we are just looking at the APA Dictionary of Psychology. And so I'm just going to read this directly and then emphasize what is important. And so it indicates here that psychology is the study of the mind and behavior. And so usually I describe it as the study of behavior and the cognitive and physiological underpinnings of behavior. And so historically, psychology was an area that was within philosophy, and then it emerged as its own scientific discipline. Okay, so in psychology, there is a focus on scientific methodology. And so psychology has major branches of research. Psychology is primarily a research discipline. You do have applied areas of psychology, and we'll touch on those, but for the most part, the teaching of psychology revolves around the research areas. And so you have experimental psychology, you have biological psychology, you have cognitive psychology, you have lifespan developmental psychology, personality psychology, and social psychology. And then there are these sub areas of research and applied psychology. So for instance, you have clinical psychology, you have industrial and organizational psychology, or I&O, you have school psychology and educational psychology, you have human factors, you have health psychology, you have cross-cultural psychology and neuropsychology. And so hopefully you are already seeing that this is not religion. This doesn't fit under the religion umbrella. It doesn't fit under the theology umbrella. It is its own distinct area of study. Now, I will offer that sometimes people are intimidated by psychology, and so therefore there is quite a bit of pushback in relation to psychology. And there have been some dynamics that have taken place over time with respect to discrete psychologists that have caused some sort of alarm or concern related to psychology and the practice of psychology or the research of psychology. But even considering all of that, you still do not have psychology fitting under the umbrella of theology, whether you're talking about monotheism or polytheism or any other ism. And so sometimes people are curious about what individuals are studying when they are studying psychology, and sometimes people are put off by psychology and then therefore seek to have others be put off by psychology. But psychology is really the study of humanity, and so it's the study of self, it's the study of human beings. And so because of that, it's one of the most important studies that a person can engage in terms of research and practice. However, of course, there are some more applied disciplines that people may pursue that may have more practical application in terms of day-to-day knowledge and skills and society building. But ultimately, psychology and the humanities are about human beings, and so about knowing the self and what it means to be human, basically. And so you also have research in psychology that involves observation, experimentation, testing, and analyses. And so all of this is done in order to explore the biological, cognitive, emotional, personal, and social processes or stimuli that underlie not only human behavior, but animal behavior. So there is also animal psychology, but for the most part, we are talking about human psychology. And so the explanation goes on to indicate that the practice of psychology involves the use of psychological knowledge. So all of that knowledge that we are talking about, that research that we are talking about, and then applying that information in order to understand and treat mental illness, emotional problems, physical and social dysfunction, and then also not just focusing on what is negative or problematic, but also in an effort to help people to enhance their lives or enhance their behaviors, enhance their human activities, whether you're talking about in school, so doing better in school, doing better in the workplace, doing better in sports, could be on the battlefield. And so it is an area that also focuses on that which is positive. And so sometimes people think it's all about that which is negative or problematic or pathological, but there is a positive component to it. And also in terms of clinical psychology and counseling psychology, you have also a focus on prevention. And so stopping bad things from happening. And also you have some use of psychology in what is known as machine building and design building, making things ergonomic, things like that, designing a building so that it fits particular uses, perhaps for individuals who are disabled and they need special accommodations. And so psychology spans a number of dynamics, whether you are talking about doing something that is proactive or doing something that is responsive. But still, as you can see, religion is not a part of this dynamic. Now we're going to specifically respond to some of the assertions related to psychology being attached to paganism, or psychology being an arm of paganism. And some of the things that were offered were dynamics such as prophesying or fortune telling in terms of telling the future, event prediction, clairvoyance, astrology, divination, magic, being able to read the sun, moon, star, sky, season patterns. None of this fits under the umbrella of psychology. All of this fits under the umbrella of theology and religion. And so even though there may be behavioral dynamics that are attached to this, and so there are some psychological dynamics related to these things in and of themselves do not have anything to do with the study of psychology or the practice of psychology. And so as we are beginning to wrap this up, we are going to look at these things and consider individually the extent to which they fit under the umbrella of religion or psychology. And I have already spelled it out for you. And so when you are starting to talk about things like sixth sense, talking about paranormal activity, what some people might even consider parapsychology, or outside of psychology, or next to psychology, or something similar to psychology, and all of that indicates that it's not psychology. And so we are talking about religion. When you're talking about prophesying, those are things that practices that you see in religion. You see it in the Bible. Foretelling the future. That is not something that is done in psychology. As a matter of fact, it is offered that psychology doesn't have a crystal ball. Psychologists do not engage in this sort of fortune telling dynamic. Sometimes there is a call to predict future behavior, but psychologists are very cautious to offer that. Psychologists really can't predict future behavior, and basically the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And so event prediction, that's religion. Clairvoyance, that's religion. Astrology, more related to religion. Divination, religion. Magic, religion. And so none of these things fit under the umbrella of psychology as the definition has been provided. And so you can go back and look at the definition and look at the different areas of research and practice with respect to psychology, and it should be very clear to you that these things don't have anything to do with psychology, and they have everything to do with religion and theology. And it's important when we are discussing these things and presenting this information, particularly to large contingents of people, that we are careful to make sure that we are not conflating these types of things or giving someone the idea that religion and psychology are one, because it can create quite a bit of confusion and quite a bit of pushback in terms of what psychology actually is and also what religion actually happens to be. So wrapping this up, we have disentangled religion from psychology. We've looked at this in the context of religion, history, and society. There has been this conflating of psychology and religion, and this was an attempt to disentangle that for individuals who might be confused, specifically as such relates to paganism, belief, and activity. And again, just to reiterate, it's important when we are discussing constructs that are not under our umbrellas of expertise that we clarify that, and then also do a bit of research so that we make sure that we are as clear as possible when we are communicating, particularly when we're talking about academic disciplines. We want to make sure that we are clear about what it is that we are communicating. There actually is an academic discipline known as religious studies, and many of those things that have been listed, those things actually are addressed in religious studies at different schools. Those dynamics, however, are not addressed in the study of psychology. A link will be provided down below related to the responsive discussion. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.